I guess the first thing I want to say is I want to thank Malcolm X Foundation, because this is a platform that's not available anyplace else. And I'm happy and proud to have been a part of its original creation. I mean, there is no place else you can go and talk the way we talk, and talk about the things that we talk about, and talk openly and so forth. I mean, it just doesn't exist. So thank you, Paper Tigers, and thank you, Malcolm X Foundation. And I'm proud of all the brothers and sisters here tonight. I got a little note here that says prepare the audience. I had envisioned there might be a couple non-minorities in the audience. And the material we're going to talk about tonight can be very, very rugged, very rough, very abrasive, having thorns. So I want to read her preface, the author, Michelle Alexander, on her book, The New Jim Crow. She writes in the preface, "This book is not for everyone. I have a specific audience in mind. People who care deeply about racial justice, but who for any number of reasons do not yet appreciate the magnitude of the crisis faced by communities of color as a result of mass incarceration. In other words, I am writing this book for people like me, the person I was 10 years ago. I am also writing it for another audience, those who have been struggling to persuade their friends, neighbors, relatives, teachers, co-workers, or political representatives that something is eerily familiar about the way our criminal justice system operates, something that looks and feels a lot like an era we supposedly left behind, but who have lacked the facts and data to back up their claims. It is my hope and prayer that this book empowers you and allows you to speak your truth with greater conviction, credibility, and courage. Last but definitely not least, I am writing this book for all of those trapped within America's latest caste system. You may be locked up or locked out of mainstream society, but you are not forgotten." So the audience out there that's not here, hopefully you can handle this material, because it is kind of rugged and rough, but it's true, absolutely true. When I read this book, and I really haven't finished, I got probably 30 or 40 pages to go, but she's very good at repackaging the same material and keeping it fresh. When I first read it, my reaction was incredible anger, and another emotion I had was incredible fear. This book really frightened me. You're talking about a well-orchestrated program to commit genocide, or committing genocide against people of color, which has been going on for centuries. It's just another way of doing it. And then also, it didn't eliminate the anger, it didn't eliminate the fear, but I felt a sense of relief, because finally somebody eloquently, with a lot of footnotes, a lot of facts, very well written, said something that I sensed most of my life, but couldn't put my finger on it, couldn't explain it the way she explained it. She did all the legwork. A lot of this material I in fact heard from Doug and Dennis over the years in a mod, but she packaged it together in a very organized way, and it makes a lot of sense, and like I said, it's very, very scary. Now, tonight, there's a couple, 3 words that you have to understand in order to understand this book, and in order to understand white supremacy. And those 3 words, number 1, genocide. Number 2 is system. And number 3, I got it here someplace, is institutionalized. Let's start with genocide. Of course, we know that side means death. Herbicide, suicide, familicide, homicide means death. Geno, or gen, comes from Latin. It means people, like gente, G-E-N-T-E, which is Spanish for people. Generations, genus, a biological and botanical term meaning families. Gentleman, a male person who is gentle. General, public, general, as in the army, a person. So it has to do with people, but another secondary definition is generate. And generate means to create, to make, to produce. And also it has to do with power, like generating power, to make, Now, take that a little further, and you come up with the word genitals. Now, what do you do with genitals? You procreate people, and that's an important concept. Now, Richard Pryor, if you ever heard Richard Pryor, and I heard a lot of his material, he has this one scene where he talks about white guys come up and say, man, why you guys always got your hands on your nuts, man? Why you guys always got your hand on your thing? And he said, because that's all we got left. And people laugh, ha, 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 and you know what? It's true. And that's in danger as well. And I gave this lecture to some kids in East Palo Alto who were entertainers, who were creators. And I talked about genocide. And one of the things I talked to them about was the UN definition of genocide, which is a systematic elimination of a people, language, culture, or economic lifestyle. And the question I posed to them, the stereotypical understanding of, or the popular understanding of genocide is that you got to be dead to be a victim of genocide. But no, you don't. So how can you be alive and be a victim of genocide? And I spent time explaining to them how you can be alive and still be a victim of genocide. Now, if you can't create, if you can't produce, if you don't have power, you in fact are degenerate. You might be alive, but you're degenerate because you're not in power. You can't produce, you can't be creative. And in this book, she doesn't use the word degenerate. I use the word degenerate because I'm a degenerate. I'm in the legal system in terms of being under control by the legal system. I was at a very young age. My entire family almost, all of the boys in my family, most of my relatives, most of the people I grew up in the north side of Kalamazoo with are degenerates. And let me give an example. I once spoke here about the Mexican Revolution. I talked about the social contract. And in the social contract, you're a citizen. And as a citizen, you have benefits and obligations from the Constitution. But when you become de-citizenized, which is what she is talking about, and she does use that word, okay, you have obligations, but now you lose most of your benefits. So now you're a degenerate. You're disempowered. And there's a reason for that. The other word, well, I'm going to give you an example, a family example of being a degenerate and being victimized by genocide. I had 4 brothers and 4 sisters, so there were 9 of us. We went to school at Lincoln Junior High School, overwhelmingly black school, in an overwhelmingly black ghetto in Kalamazoo.
Burdick Street.
Patterson. Was it Patterson? Burdick Street, you're
Patterson
right.
and Burdick, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, of the 9 children in our family, 6 were placed in special education. Now back then, if you were special education, people call you retarded. Okay, because they figured you had to have something wrong with you. And in a very young age, my brothers and sisters were placed in special education. 6 out of 9. And I thought to myself, you know, we have to be genetically inferior, genetically deficient to be that unintelligent to be in special education. And I thought about that my whole life. Until about 15, 20 years ago, there was a lawsuit in Holland brought about by people of color against the Holland's public school system. They went to court, they accused the public school system of tracking people of color through the use of special education and won their case. So I began to realize that, you know what, this was preconceived, this was predetermined, and as a result of that, I got brothers and sisters who can't read. I got a brother who's a homeless beggar. I got a sister who's pretty much a homeless beggar. And like I said, several of them can't read. My oldest brother can barely read. So they were victimized by this racism that was institutionalized in the educational system. So they were alive, but they're victims of genocide. Now, when I talked about a social contract, I talked about the difference between a citizen and a denizen. A citizen is somebody who has a right to utilize the Constitution of the nation state. A denizen is somebody who lives there but is not a citizen, therefore doesn't have the rights of citizenship. So people who have been incarcerated or victimized by the criminal justice system that she talks about, they go from citizenship to becoming denizens. Now, if you're a denizen, you're also proletariat. And I had talked also in the social contract discussion that proletariat comes from the word prolis, from Latin in the times of Rome, because prolis means offspring. And if you were poor, they were called proletariat because they would say that you're only good for making babies. Why? To support the military and also to pay tribute to the government. So you go from citizen to denizen / proletariat, because even if you're a criminal man, if you're prepared to go out there and kill innocent men, women, and children, okay, you don't have a lot of rights. Very, very restricted. The other word is institutionalizing. Growing up, I hung around a lot of civil rights people, and I can't think of the center, Douglas Community Center. I used to go there a lot, and they did a lot with NAACP and civil rights, and the civil rights movement and so forth. And they kept talking about, they used this term institutionalized racism. And I didn't know what they meant. Institutionalized racism. And I looked at the word institute and really understand it and so forth and so forth. Institutionalized racism. Now I have a better understanding of what they mean. Because when something's instituted, it becomes established. Okay? It becomes so established, so interwoven, that it repeats itself almost automatically. So when you talk about institutionalized racism that is interwoven so deeply that you yourself become a racist against yourself and don't even know it, unless it's brought to your attention. So it could be an established principle, an established law, or a custom. And we know customs are something you repeat again and again and again. And the other word is system. System and arrangement of things. Primary definition. B, a set of facts, rules, etc., arranged in such a way to show an orderly plan. Orderly plan, important concepts. The system, because we talk about the system, are the people or order in power who dictate the order of things, the arrangements of things. What is white supremacy? By Elizabeth Martinez, and I think it's very important to point this out. Now, this was written in 1998, and Elizabeth Martinez is probably 85 years old right now. She was considered for a Nobel Peace Prize around this time, 1998. But she gives this description, I call it a description of white supremacy, and it's incredibly powerful and very, very descriptive. White supremacy is a historically based, institutionally perpetuated system of exploitation and oppression of continents, nations, and peoples of color by white peoples and nations of the European continent for the purpose of maintaining and defending a system of wealth, power, and privilege. The most common mistake people make when they talk about racism is to think that it is a collection of prejudices and individual acts of discrimination. They do not see that it is a system, a web of interlocking, reinforcing institutions, economic, military, legal, educational, religious, and cultural. As a system, racism affects every aspect of life in a country. By not seeing that racism is systematic, part of a system, people often personalize or individualize racist acts. Supremacy defines a power relationship. The United States is a nation state created by military conquest in several stages. The first stage, and I'll just cover that, was the European seizure of the lands inhabited by indigenous peoples. That process must be called genocide, and it created the land base for this country. The elimination of indigenous people and seizure of their lands was the first condition for its existence. The roots of U.S. racism or white supremacy lie in establishing economic exploitation by the theft of resources and human labor, then justifying that exploitation by institutionalizing the inferiority of its victims. The first application of white supremacy or racism by the Euro-Americans who control U.S. society was against indigenous people. Then came blacks, originally as slaves and later as exploited wage labor. They were followed by Mexicans who lost their means of survival when they lost their land holdings and also became wage slaves. Mexican labor built the Southwest along with Chinese, Filipino, Japanese, and other workers. In short, white supremacy and economic power are born together. There was an article, and I just read the first couple sentences. Marines' Memories Bittersweet. And George Taylor, talking about George Taylor, and he says, when I went into the Marine Corps, Taylor was drafted in 1943 at the age of 18, the year after President Franklin Roosevelt ordered the Marine Corps to accept blacks. He was brought from a segregated city in the north to a segregated military base in the south. They're fighting a common enemy and they're segregated. Montford Point was part of Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. Only the officers were white. That's that relationship, that white supremacy. You see it in football, you see it in basketball, you see it in teaching, you see it at work, you see it all over the place. Now, this book, The New Jim Crow, why the title, The New Jim Crow? And I asked Dennis if he would give the political and historical description of Jim Crow. So I'm going to hand that over to you to Dennis. Would you please respond to that, Dennis?
Be happy to. I don't think you can understand the new Jim Crow unless you understand Jim Crow as it stands historically. Jim Crow came into being as a way for Southern white supremacists to maintain control. During Reconstruction after the Civil War, you saw blacks ascend to economic, judicial, and political heights that they'd never seen before, nor have they seen since. You had a situation after the Civil War where the southern states were decimated. Their economic livelihood was destroyed, which is based on slavery. They had all their skilled tradesmen, their artisans, their blacksmiths, their carpenters, their architects, the people who built the South, either moving north or setting up shop for themselves. Not to mention the damage they had from the war. The infrastructure of the South was destroyed. The railroads, the bridges, the roads, the public and common grounds were all gone. So they were in a terrible situation analogous to what you saw in Europe at the end of the World War II, and they were in need of a Marshall Plan. Problem was, during Reconstruction, blacks were making these strong gains. You saw 15% of all Southern office holders. Listen to this number. 15% of all Southerners who held office were black. I'm talking at a local level, I'm talking at a state level, I'm talking at a national level. The House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. has never been more chocolate than it was during Reconstruction. We're talking senators, we're talking congressmen, we're talking mayors. The entire South, except for the state of Virginia, had Republican governors, which was the party of the North. So the Democratic Party, which represented the Southerners, which represented the old Confederacy, was impotent and had no way to pull itself back up. Problem with the Republicans, though, were they were facing a close election. And they wanted this guy named Johnson to win the election, and he probably would have won, but it was too close for comfort. So they made an agreement with the Southerners, and they said that they would end Reconstruction, and they would usher in an era of Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws that effectively brought in legal terrorism. And not only was it legal terrorism, and we'll talk about that briefly, but it was a set of explicit laws that created a de jure segregation. You may not live here. by law. You may not eat here by law. You may not use this means of transportation by law. You may not drink from this fountain. You may not enjoy this park. You may not be on this side of town. And you certainly can't buy property, except for where we tell you to. You can't work in this job. You can't organize a guild. You can't organize a union. Those were the laws. That was on the table. That was all buttressed, though, by Jim Crow violence. Now, you'll hear some Tea Partier types nowadays talk about freedom and terrorism and protect us. They don't know a damn thing about being terrorized. We know about being terrorized. Summary execution was common. Cop catch you in the wrong place at the wrong time, he just put a bullet in your head. No questions asked. You had people who were thrown out of their homes, had their properties confiscated, taken their rights to go to any school taken away. But even that wasn't the horror. The horror was the low estimate that we see, which occurred from 1876 to 1969. You hear that number? 1969. That's when you were in Lincoln, yep, and I was at Millwood. That wasn't that long ago. You had 4,500 black men hung, shot, burnt, mutilated. And the vast majority of these men, which is not well known, but the majority, I want you to listen to this point, were sexually mutilated. The degenerate thing you're talking about. They had their penises cut off. What's that saying? What's the point that they're making here? So this is the period that we saw from the end of Reconstruction to the beginning of the Voting Rights Act, which was passed in 1965. Jim Crow momentum continued until 4 years after that, which brings us to the 80s. The 80s is about the time that the new Jim Crow started becoming codified. Now, in the North, all the time that Jim Crow laws were in effect in the South, you had de facto segregation. You had covenants, you had deeds, you had tradition, and you had intimidation that says, dark man, don't buy a house over here. You can't buy a house over here. We won't give you a loan. We're going to redline your neighborhoods. And if you do, we're going to intimidate you out of here. Your son can't date my daughter. You can't go to this school. But because it wasn't codified, it was de facto, but it was very effective. And it was also augmented by the same racial terrorism that we saw in the South. The same hangings, the same mutilation. It happened in Indiana. It happened in upstate New York. It happened in Ohio. It happened in Michigan. Ever been to Howell? So what we see here is a tradition of European dominance by immoral and what should be illegal means, buttressed by terrorism. Come the 1980s, when blacks once again were trying to make gains on the economic front and on the political front at the end of the civil rights movement, we saw a new effort to codify into law ways to disenfranchise and deny minorities, particularly black men, their rights. And that's what we started hearing about. We got to get tough on crime. Remember that? Under Reagan? You got to get tough on crime. We've got to get rid of these lily-livered judges. We've got to get tough on the sentencing. We've got to have mandatory sentencing. We've got to have 3-strike laws. We've got to have tough drug laws. And so what you see as a result of the new Jim Crow is the same codification by law. We will take from these people their constitutional rights, and you're seeing the same results. You see a situation now where the present population since 1980 has quintupled. You hear that? 5 times more people in prison in the United States today than there were in 1979. Mm-hmm. Most of them are black, and 2/3 of them are in jail for non-violent drug offenses. Mm-hmm. A bag of weed, an ecstasy pill, a vial of crack cocaine.
Yeah, crack, not powder. No,
right, right. And the final thing I'll say about this is, I just last night, just by coincidence, when I was on the road, I heard an interview by a guy named Mark Carlin. Do yourself a favor and go on truthout.org and read this 8-part series. Mark Carlin was joined in the studio by Dick Gregory, one of my heroes, and a brother named Mark Thompson who has his show. And he put together this narrative that lasted 45 minutes, but when you synthesize it and you boil it all down, what he said was, you've got Wall Street banks, you've got the military-industrial complex, you've got right-wing politicians, and you've got a amalgamation of all of these people looking for a way to consolidate power and wealth, and what they chose as their avenue was the quote-unquote war on drugs. With the war on drugs, they were able to build up the prison industrial complex. Mm-hmm. They were able to increase the size of the poppy fields in Afghanistan exponentially each decade until now we're over there and we're helping them grow it with John Deere tractors. They created crack cocaine. The CIA created crack cocaine. They have built this up to the point now where, according to Mark Carlin, the international banking industry would collapse without drug money, cash. Not wire transfers, not deeds on properties, investment. They need that cash. Our economy worldwide would collapse without the drug money. And that drug is being distributed all over the world in every community, but you don't see the middle-class white kids go to jail, much less be even arrested. But young black men and women, young black Hispanic men and women of color fill up our jails, buy the drugs, sell the drugs at the wholesale and retail level, and they pay the price for it, all to hold up an illegitimate and immoral and unsustainable economic system that's built on their backs. That's the crux of the new Jim Crow.
Yeah, but let me finish this part here. So the war on drugs is not really a war on drugs. It's a war on people. It's a war on people of color. But why? It was to reverse the advantages that were gained by the civil rights movement, starting with Brown versus, well, not starting with, but like Brown versus Board of Education. So Reagan comes on the scene, the John Wayne type, the hero of this country, and he starts to move on it. And I want to read what she says about that time period. She said, once elected, Reagan's promise to enhance the federal government's role in fighting crime was complicated by the fact that fighting street crime has traditionally been the responsibility of state and local enforcement. After a period of initial confusion and controversy regarding whether the FBI and the federal government should be involved in a street crime, the Justice Department announced its intention to cut in half the number of specialists assigned to identify and prosecute white-collar criminals and to shift its attention to street crime, especially drug law enforcement. In October 1982, President Reagan officially announced his administration's war on drugs. At the time he declared this new war, less than 2% of the American public viewed drugs as the most important issue facing the nation. This fact was no deterrent to Reagan, for the drug war from the outset had little to do with public concern about drugs and much to do with public concern about race. By waging a war on drug users and dealers, Reagan made good on his promise to crack down on the racially defined others, the underserving. Practically overnight, the budgets of federal law enforcement agencies soared. Between 1980 and 1984, FBI anti-drug funding increased from $8 million to $95 million. Department of Defense anti-drug allocations increased from $33 million in 1981 to $1,043 million in 1991. It's a 10-year period. During that same period, DEA anti-drug spending grew from $86 million to $1,026 million. And FBI anti-drug allocations grew from $38 million to $181 million. By contrast, funding for agencies responsible for drug treatment, prevention, and education was drastically reduced. Okay, you had something you wanted to say. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I just keep picking up things I want to respond to or add to, and then we get on to something else, so, but I just want to say, I'm kind of the odd person here. I'm a white, older woman.
The enemy.
I am not the enemy.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
But I am a learner.
He's kidding.
I am an educator. At this age of my life, I am a crone. I am a wise woman
Yeah.
who's had much education and experience. In 1969, I was teaching in a Catholic school. I was a Dominican sister, a religious, who was concerned about educational needs of children and social justice. And I lived on the edge of Detroit. In fact, I moved into Detroit. And so there were so many things in this book that just took me back to that was going on when I was there. I didn't know that. And one of the parts in here that was so dramatic, that was so significant to me, was with the war on drugs and where the war was waged. Because I lived, Grosse Pointe was on one side, Detroit was on the other. There were kids on drugs in Grosse Pointe, there were kids, and they didn't go into Detroit to buy their drugs. You know, they could get their drugs, and they could get their drugs of choice, and the black kids could get their drugs of choice. And maybe they partied together, some, not too much then, in the early 70s. But why didn't, and the author brings that out very well, why didn't they go into the fraternities? Why didn't they go into the white neighborhoods with their war on drugs? Never, never, never. Why? Because the white population have the wherewithal, they have the political clout where they can object to this intrusion in their homes, where the black community did not. They did not have the means, they did not have the money, they did not have support in their community. They had a fear, a constant fear, even in the churches, because I was involved with all the churches. The group that I belonged to was made up of a basic grassroots group, and there were people from white churches and black churches, and we were working together to maintain the neighborhoods in Detroit at that time, because that was at the time of the Exodus. But it was the same thing. People didn't talk about the crime, and they tried to stay in their homes, but it just amazes me. And I dealt with those kids with those problems, but. The mafia lived in Grosse Pointe too. We had all the top mafia people. You wouldn't have a war on drugs there, would you?
I think there was a lot of, from throughout those decades, a lot of social protests on the part of minorities, especially blacks. But when you're in power, you just overlook that. And also there was an acquiescence on the part of a lot of white American citizens who didn't know better because they had been propagandized by the mass media that, you know what, you better be afraid of them. They're dangerous. Da-da this and da-da that. And they bought into it. And they still buy into it. And you still see that going on. You know, you got the issue now with terrorism. People fighting for their liberation. People, some are terrorists, some are not. You know, who might decide? But just because they call it terrorists, I become very suspicious. But this is just another way of getting people on your side to support a cause that is very devious and dark, that is not necessarily accurate. But when you tell white America they're the enemy, they're bad, over and over again, like the crack hoes and the crack babies and the drug dealers and the pimps and the murderers and all that. Hey, I'm gonna tell you something. I'm scared to go to my ghetto after I read that stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Plus, drug dealers need customers. Any product that you sell, I don't care if it's a commodity or something high tech like an iPad, you need customers to make the thing work. The growers or the creators and the distributors of drugs are Wall Street bankers in the United States government. Let's not equivocate. And in order for them to be able to keep this economic model sustained, they need customers. They need them in Grosse Pointe, and they need them in the city of Detroit. But the icing to the cake in Detroit is not only do you have customers, but you have a way of controlling an entire sector of your society that you don't want to have power. You can addict a few. You can hook a few others to alcohol. You can imprison many. You can take fathers away from their family. You can take children away from their mothers. You can take children out of school and put them in prison. You can Jim Crowize them. And that's what we have to keep our eyes focused on here tonight when we talk about this. It's a way, just like the original Jim Crow, to control and to exploit a group of people for immoral reasons. To me, it's nothing more than that.
In the criminal justice system, when I think of the criminal justice system, I think of every aspect, every level of government. Judicial, executive, and what's the other one? What is it? Legislative, the Congress, the Supreme Court, and the executive president's office. Okay, they all work together. And when you read this book, it documents how they work together. You got to have funding for that war. You got foot soldiers called police officers who are out there arresting people. Okay, they have to be supported by the prosecutor, by the judges, okay, by politicians, by the Congress, because they need money. In fact, she talks about initially, the law enforcement officers were not really up on that. They weren't really into that. They said, we got other crimes that are real. But then Congress put together an incentive, a financial incentive. It was called the Burn. I got it someplace. Okay, it was called the Burn program. I'm going to read that to you real quick. It's incredible.
And guns.
Okay, it says the resistance within law enforcement to the drug war created something of a dilemma for the Reagan administration. In order for the war to actually work, that is, in order for it to succeed in achieving its political goals, it was necessary to build a consensus among state and local law enforcement agencies that the drug war should be a top priority in their hometowns. The solution? Cash.
Forfeitures.
Huge cash grants were made to those law enforcement agencies that were willing to make law enforcement a top priority. The new system of control is traceable to a significant degree to a massive bribe offered to state and local law enforcement by the federal government. In 1988, at the behest of the Reagan administration, Congress revised the program that provides federal aid to law enforcement, renaming it the Edward Byrne Memorial State and Local Enforcement Assistance Program after a New York City police officer who was shot to death while guarding the home of a drug case witness. The Byrne program was designed to encourage every federal grant recipient to help fight the war on drugs. Millions of dollars in federal aid have been offered to state and local law enforcement agencies willing to wage the war. This federal grant money has resulted in a proliferation of narcotic task forces, including those responsible for highway drug addiction. Nationally, narcotics task forces make up to about 40% of all Byrne grant funding. But in some states, as much as 90% of all Byrne grant funds go toward specialized narcotics task forces. In fact, it is questionable whether any specialized drug enforcement activity would exist in some states without the Byrne program. Other forms of valuable aid have been offered as well. The DEA has offered free training, intelligence, and technical support to state highway patrol agencies that are willing to commit their officers to highway drug addiction. The Pentagon, for its part, has been giving away military intelligence and millions of dollars in firepower to state and local agencies willing to make the rhetoric war a literal one. Almost immediately after the federal dollars began to flow, law enforcement agencies across the country began to compete for funding, equipment, and training. By the late 1990s, the overwhelming majority of state and local police forces in the country had availed themselves of the newly available resources and added a significant military component to buttress their drug war operations. According to the Cato Institute, in 1997 alone, the Pentagon handed over 1.2 million pieces of military equipment to local police departments.
That's phenomenal.
Then it goes on, it says 253 aircraft, including 6 and 7 passenger airplanes, UH-60 Black Hawk and UH-1 Huey helicopters, 7,853 M16 rifles, 181 grenade launchers, 8,131 bulletproof helmets, and 1,163 pairs of night vision goggles. A retired police officer in New Haven, Connecticut told the New York Times, quote, "I was offered tanks, bazookas, and anything I wanted," end of quote. Waging war. In barely a decade, the war on drugs went from a political slogan to an actual war. As described in a Cato Institute report, paramilitary units, most commonly called Special Weapons and Tactics or SWAT teams, were quickly formed in virtually every major city to fight the drug war. SWAT teams originated in the 1960s and gradually became more common in the 1970s, but until the drug war, they were used rarely, primarily for extraordinary emergency situations such as hostage-taking, hijackings, or prison escapes. Today, the most common use of SWAT teams is to serve narcotic warrants, usually with forced, unannounced entry into the home. Scary, scary.
I sat in
scary.
front of a house and watched a SWAT team get up. I was picking up somebody, and I was in my car alone, and there was a black car in front of me, and I didn't pay much attention because this person was supposed to come out. All of a sudden, I see them, they're coming out in their black leather jackets, they're opening the trunk, they're taking out guns. I can't say whether the rifle, I don't know anything about guns, but anyway, they went in, they smashed everything. They smashed guitars, they smashed everything in the house, and turned out it was the wrong house. Well, they would have to do anything about that.
5 times the number of people in jail as a result of this. 5 times. This is an economic and political power grab. That's all this is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
It's
indefensible.
The other thing is, and what's that word for when you confiscate property, money, guns? Forfeiture. They also passed the federal forfeiture laws, and this again.
Yeah.
And the local agents were told, you can keep 80, 90, sometimes 100% of what you confiscate. Well, this is an incentive to go out of your way to bust people. And they would bust people, and they wouldn't even charge them, but they take everything they own.
And make them prove that they didn't have some type of nefarious way to gain that money.
And if they did arrest them, they had no money. They had nothing for an attorney or to pay any of the expenses that were incurred.
So they go to the Supreme Court to challenge the legitimacy of this kind of conduct, and the Supreme Court supports it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got the court system, you got Congress working hand in hand, and then you got the executive system. They're all working hand in hand. And again, now you got the foot soldiers. And when she talks about criminal justice, she talks about every component and what role they play. And one of the most important roles is the police officer, who's trying to get paid. Okay, and the more arrests they get, the more money they get.
Yeah.
Okay, plus the confiscation, and the police officer is very, very important because they come in direct contact with the so-called criminals, or gonna be criminals, or they're gonna make criminals, etc. So they have a lot of what she called discretion in who they want to arrest, when they want to arrest them, why they want to arrest them, who they search, when they search. And this is going on in New York with the stop and frisk.
Yeah.
And that's a very scary situation there. And then you got the prosecutor, and Marilyn and I were talking about that. She said, I can't believe how much freedom they have in charging people, because they have this thing that she talks about called overloading. When they overload, if you're busted for one thing, they'll add another 5 or 6. Say, look, we'll drop these other ones if you plead to this.
Yeah.
Okay, so they get money when he pleads, and he goes to prison. They get more money, and then they don't have to go to court.
And then he has a record, and so that denies him many others.
Right.
Right to
Civilian
vote.
privileges,
Right.
right to vote,
Right.
number
And-
one.
and Dennis, you
or
talked
to serve
about-
on a jury. Yeah.
You talked about probably about 7 or 8 months ago about this judge someplace in the South. You might want to talk about that, who was given, who was discharged, but he was getting paid to send kids to juvenile detention,
Yeah.
etc.
That was in
That's part of that
Pennsylvania.
new system.
Where
you
was
know.
it?
This is in Western Pennsylvania, as a matter of fact. And ironically, most of the children that he was abusing were working class and poor white children. But the point is, it's so out of control nowadays that it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle, and they got to keep feeding it. So what he would do is the police force is incentivized to go out there and crack down on crime. So they'd arrest a child for vagrancy because they skipped school, or they would be accused of shoplifting while they were in the store. No evidence of any shoplifting. They had an honor student. A kid was arrested on an honor student. He had a bright future, and they accused him of some crime. I forget now. And what this judge would do is he'd give them a sentence that was disproportionate to any crime they were accused of, let alone did. and sentenced them to actual jail cells. And you had 14, 15, 16-year-old children serving 2, 3, 4 years in juvenile penitentiaries. And in the end, it turns out that he was paid by a private prison industrial complex investor to sentence these children to fill up these vacancies, because like Holiday Inn or Marriott or Hilton or whoever, they need occupancy. They don't want vacancies. And they say for the prison industrial complex, the number is 90%. For them to be profitable, for them to be able to pay their CEOs $2.3 million or whatever it is, they need to have about 90%. Easily sustainable with the way the sentencing guidelines are now. So you have, again, a privatized system that's designed to exploit and take advantage and abuse the citizenship of this country. It's been focused on African Americans and Hispanics, but it's growing beyond that because, again, it's, you've got a tiger by the tail. How do you tell it to stop eating? It's going to keep exploiting the situation, and it's always going to go after the disadvantaged.
That's interesting that you say that, and I think white society has to understand that they're next, and that's evident in the Occupy Wall Street movement. That now, we talk about the word capitalism and how it's cannibalistic, is that once you get us under control, you just keep moving. You just keep taking more people, getting more people under control. They had a situation, I think it was in North or South Dakota, where a drone was used to spy in on this group of, they were doing something, I don't know if it was legal or illegal, but they said the drone saw some guns, so the police arrested them, they went to court, and it was found illegal because of the way they did it, whatever. And people are bragging about the drone war, saying, man, nobody gets killed, you can go home and see your kids at night, you can drink coffee while you're running these drones, killing people, we don't spend much money, blah, blah, this and blah, blah, that. Well, those drones are coming home.
Absolutely.
Okay, these police departments are being supplied with these drones. And you know what, man? They're going to get white folks too. And that's becoming very, very evident. Very, very evident.
As the crack problem was to the black community in the 1980s and into today, it's still going on. Methamphetamine is the problem for especially rural white America. You go to Allegheny County, Nuevo County, Montcalm County, you read the news every day about these houses that are getting busted. They kick the door in and it's a meth lab or something. And you can go online and see the photographs of these people, these white people who were arrested over the course of a year. They show their first mug shot, they show their last mug shot, their most recent one. Looks like they've aged 30 or 40 years. Their teeth fall out, their faces, their cheeks cave in. It absolutely annihilates these people physically. And the same thing that happened to, as I said, the black community in the 1980s is happening right now in the white community with the meth epidemic.
With the same motive, because it's Wyatt who makes money off the cold medications that they use to make the methamphetamine. It's your big chemical manufacturers who make profits, unsurpassed profits on the raw material that's used to make those methamphetamine products. So, again, if the federal government was sincere about interdiction, marijuana would not cross the southern border. Cocaine would not come into the United States. Really. You would not be able to buy the material you need in order to make methamphetamine. If they were sincere, they could interdict right now. It would be over. But again, the banking system would collapse. That huge profit margin for these chemical companies with the methamphetamine epidemic will go away. And to your point about the militarization in the Pachu, what we saw here in this book, The New Jim Crow, from the Reagan era up through the 90s, was put on steroids after the false flag attack on 2001.
Exactly.
I mean, now you have a true militarization of the police force. They're walking around with M16 and jack boots. Only thing they don't do is goose step. And that's where we are today. And people take it all in stride as if, well, this is what we need for security. My wife and I went on vacation a few weeks ago. I don't think I ever told you about this, but we shared a condo with several different couples where you had a common room, where a living room and kitchen, and you get into conversations with people. Met this couple from Traverse City, both retired, Social Security, Medicaid, their children on Medicare.
They're white.
Yeah. Couldn't wait to watch Fox News. Couldn't wait to read Michael Savage. Couldn't wait to denigrate the 99%. I got blood running out of my mouth because I'm biting my tongue because my wife tells me I better not talk back to her because she wants to enjoy her vacation. So I waited till I got home. But it amazed me how people can put up blinders and criticize government generosity as they live and breathe off the government team.
Yes.
How they can criticize the 99% when they are the 99%. When they can ignore the crimes of the 1%, which are all around us, the methamphetamine, the exploitation of our children who are forced through economic means to be drafted into the military to go die for something that has nothing to do with our so-called freedom. I could go on and on and on, not to mention the Jim Crow laws. That is what sustains and protects those people, is the general ignorance of the American population. Ahmad and I just had a conversation earlier this evening about the apathy and ignorance among our people.
Yeah.
I don't know and I don't want to know.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't, yeah.
It's a shame.
But what is changing today? Go ahead.
I was reading some books, and when we get to the incarceration part, our educational system has failed us in the sense of maybe it's trying to fail those third and fourth graders because they're the ones that are failing the institution. They're being built on projection of their failure at the third and fourth grade.
Wow.
No question.
Wow.
Absolutely.
And if we don't understand that, that is where it starts, and that's what it's based on.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we're going to fill them up. And those kids are poor or uneducated.
Yeah.
And they're generally in our race and in the poor white race.
Yeah.
No
We're all
question.
poor race.
Yes,
Yeah.
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 No
Right.
question.
What's changing? What's changing today, though, is there's always a struggle for the masses. Whoever controls the masses is going to control power, because the masses are the proletariat. They're the warriors. They pay the tribute. They go out there and kill people for ridiculous reasons, thinking it's patriotic and wholesome and all the other stuff. And that's, to me, that's the new manifest destiny. You control the masses. You control everything. What's changing today is that a lot of luxuries are being taken away because people are losing jobs. People are losing their homes. People are losing money, so they can't pay for their cars, they can't pay for their TVs, they can't pay for their food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So where does it stop? How long does it continue? And at what point do people say, you know what, something ain't right? Something ain't right. Even the ignorant, man. Something ain't right. I got to do something. And I have said for a very long time, people are not interested in freedom. That's an illusion. People are interested in luxury, comfort, pleasure, etc. And I really don't blame them. But when you miss that, when that's gone, how do you respond? And if it takes that long, maybe it's too late. Like you said, man, you can't close the door. It's too late, man. It's just too late, and that's what's scary.
I'm in both ends of that. I have a daughter that's in the institution, out of the institution, but not really. But she can't have a regular job simply because she has a felony. I have a son that has an MBA at Penn State and quit the corporate world in 1991 to tell me that it was so much corruptness he was going to go through the police department in Georgia, Fulton County, and work in the police department and work the other way against it. He's now within the system down there after all these years, and he's dissatisfied with his promotion. But let me tell you, I keep my fingers crossed that he remains alive. But he told me of the corporate corruption, and we see this day, there's no president that can hold the wealthy people of this world when they want to take our money that we invest and put it in derivative investment and then lower the whole system that we have of having a house. Why don't they put those people behind bars?
Right.
Yeah.
Because they're the bosses.
Yes, that's true.
They're the
But
bosses.
people have to realize that.
Yeah.
Are we protecting them when they've taken so much
Oh,
away
we're
from our
afraid of them.
parents, our people, and our finances in the future?
Well, that's the point to what Apache was reading earlier, talking about the judicial, the executive, and the legislative branches all in concert behind this Jim Crow scheme. But who's pulling their strings? See, that's what we need to get to. That's the answer to the question: who's sanctioning these outlandish laws? Who's sanctioning these immoral movements? That's where we need to go through, and that's the Wall Street. That's the Wall Street international big bankers.
Cool.
That's a military industrial complex.
Cool, brother.
Yeah, the wealthy. That's who's really running things, and that's the reason why we're in the position that we are today. You know, Michelle Alexander in this book says, you have young men and women who go to prison. They can never vote. They can never get public housing. They can never get a good job. They can't get health care. They have no economic alternative but to go back into the maws of the dragon of illegal drug trade, where they can make a living until such time as they're thrown back into the prison industrial complex, where they make more money for the system. It's a vicious and immoral circle. Yeah.
You know, and it's all about money, as we've talked about. You know, Wachovia Bank and Wells Fargo were busted laundering drug money back in 2010 in federal court. All they did was get a fine, a minuscule fine compared to the amount of money that they laundered. They're still laundering money. I mean, who's kidding who?
Mm-hmm.
And then the quote from the Mark Carlin article, one of them, this was from Friday, June 22nd, last Friday. It's not true, though. You can go look it up. I picked this up today. Here's a quote from her. A U.S. Senate Banking Committee reportedly estimated that between $500 billion and $1 trillion are laundered each year through banks worldwide, with approximately half that amount funneled through U.S. banks. $1 trillion. And the U.S. Senate Committee made the estimate. So, I mean, who's kidding who? It's got to be.
Could you repeat that number?
A U.S. Senate Banking Committee reportedly estimated that between $500 billion and $1 trillion are laundered each year through banks worldwide, with approximately half that amount funneled through U.S. banks.
So where is that money coming from that they're laundering? Does it say?
Cash.
It is, okay.
It's cash money.
Cash.
Okay,
They get paid.
cash money, okay.
They get paid.
But
to
is that
launder
coming through the police departments, from law? It could be anything, okay.
You know, the banks are laundering money through the
Okay,
front.
yeah, I got that
It's
part,
What
yeah.
they have is a mafia.
Yeah.
You know, and they set up these front groups.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you
Yeah,
get
one of the
a
examples
front
Carlin
group,
gave is you got
a shipping company.
a restaurant in a Tony part of town that's got the top chefs, and it's got all the accoutrements that you want for a great restaurant, but they don't have very many customers.
Yeah.
Where's the money coming from?
Front.
It's coming from drugs.
Yeah.
It's not the kid with his hat on backwards in the ghetto with Timberland boots on with earphones. That's not where the drug deals are going down.
No.
They're going down in boardrooms.
Yeah.
They're going down inside of Chase Manhattan. They're going down inside Wachovia. That's where it is.
I want to make this point too about, we talk about TV propaganda. You know, back in the 60s, you had the goofy ass Joe Friday on Dragnet.
Yeah.
You know, it was corny, and people would see that, and they,
Just the facts.
some people,
Just the facts.
Some people would get, take it seriously, but most people thought it was a joke. Well, when the war on drugs really ramped up with the Reagan administration, you had propaganda like Different Strokes, where you had Arnold and Willis and Nancy Reagan on TV. You know, she comes on TV telling them that drugs are bad. Just say no.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And her husband is laundering drug money so he can finance death squads in Nicaragua.
Yeah.
Yep.
You have Miami Vice, which was a far cry from being corny like Dragnet was. You had, you know, these new Crockett and Tubbs, or Don Johnson and Philip Michael Thomas.
Mhm.
You don't remember all this crap. But these guys dress up nice, and they're in Miami, they're driving flashy cars, and every week they bust some new drug dealer, and, you know, it was a completely different show. It was more high-tech, more slick than Dragnet.
Mhm.
And the ultimate in TV propaganda, cops.
Oh, yeah.
Showing actual police officers, the damn thing's been on TV for 25 years now. Actual police officers going into people's communities, kicking their doors in, white people, black people, all of them,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
That's what we've been talking about here the whole evening.
Mhm.
You know, showing you that police power, the state power is going to overpower you whenever you step out of line.
Mhm.
You know, and they always edit the thing so that you have the biggest jackasses that make the cut and get on TV. These people are just out of their mind.
Mhm.
You know, it's completely constructed to encourage the population at large, not only to make fun of the people who are in these situations, for whatever reason they might be there. We've
Mhm.
talked about many reasons why.
Mhm.
These people have 3 strikes against them before they can step out of bed in the morning because of the way the system's set up. But it encourages the population at large to look at this as a form of entertainment. instead of really thinking about what the consequences are of all this stuff going on.
You know,
It's gotten very slick.
yeah, that's a very disturbing program. And it was suggested, I forget that guy's name, who did Fahrenheit 9/11, he said we ought to do something on the CEOs, have cops for the CEOs. But anyway, Dennis, you were saying earlier about the ignorance of the masses and so forth. Part of that ignorance is the belief that the electoral process is going to resolve these issues. Let's look at a couple presidents. President Clinton, because we know about Reagan, we know about the Bush boys, and Clinton, the first Negro president, according to some blacks. In fact, when Obama was running for office, they jokingly asked in one of his debates, is Clinton the first Negro president? And that clown says, I don't know, I ain't seen him dance yet, you know. And they got a lot of laughs. But let's talk about Clinton. She writes about Clinton. She says, to the contrary, in 1992, presidential candidate Bill Clinton vowed that he would never permit any Republican to be perceived as tougher on crime than he.
Right.
True to his word, just weeks after or before the critical New Hampshire primary, Clinton chose to fly home to Arkansas to oversee the execution of Ricky Ray Rector, a mentally impaired black man who had little conception of what was about to happen to him, that he asked for the dessert from his last meal to be saved for him until the morning. After the execution, Clinton remarked, quote, I can be nicked a lot, but no one can say I'm soft on crime, end of quote. Once elected, Clinton endorsed the idea of federal 3 strikes and you're outlaw. And it goes on and on and on. It talks about a bill created dozens of new federal capital crimes mandating life sentences for some 3-time offenders and authorized more than $16 billion for state prison grants and expansion of state and local police forces. Clinton escalated the war on drugs beyond what conservatives had imagined possible a decade earlier, after the Justice Policy Institute had observed, quote, the Clinton administration tough on crime policy resulted in the largest increases in federal and state prison inmates of any president in American history, end of quote. That is up until Obama comes on the scene, and she has a comment on Obama because we are so color-coded in our thinking patterns that we think Obama is the answer, and we think that Congress is prohibiting Obama from making changes when he has an incredible amount of power. Remember the Byrne program. Funding for the Byrne-sponsored drug task forces had begun to dwindle. Let me say that again, dwindle during President Bush's tenure. But Barack Obama, as a presidential candidate, promised to revive the Byrne grant program, claiming it is, quote, critical to creating the anti-drug task forces our communities need, end of quote. Obama honored his word following the election, dramatically increasing funding for the Byrne grant program despite its abysmal track record. The Economic Recovery Act of 2009 included more than $2 billion in new Byrne funding and an additional $600 million to increase state and local enforcement across the country. Relatively little organized opposition to the drug war currently existed, and any dramatic effort to scale back the war may publicly condemned as, quote, soft on crime. The war had become institutionalized. It was no longer a special program or politicized project. It is simply the way things are done. Now I want to go back to the genocide. I want to go back to the genocide and talk about, this is genocide against people of color, and here's a person of color supposedly representing people, having some representation for people of color, and he is contributing at an accelerated rate on steroids to genocide by the very people that got him in office.
I did not read this book, but after listening to the panel, and I think what we already talked about, this has been happening over the years. You talked about the historical Jim Crow laws and now the new Jim Crow. I don't know if the author addressed what changes can be made then, because you talk about it being a system, institutionalized, and is it so ingrained that we just have to let it run its course and people are just going to be damned? Or what kind of changes do individuals have to make to change anything?
Well, so, you know, that's a good question.
Right here from each of the panel members.
Okay, so let me tell you what she says, okay?
What page
She
is
says,
that?
Chapter 6 reflects on what acknowledging the presence of Jim Crow means for the future of civil rights advocacy. I argue that nothing short of a major social movement can successfully dismantle the new caste system. Meaningful reforms can be cannot be achieved without such a movement. But unless the public consensus supporting the current system is completely overturned, the basic structure of the new caste system will remain intact. And then she says, the collapse of mass incarceration will not mean the death of a racial caste in America. Inevitably, a new system of radicalized social control will emerge, one that we cannot foresee, just as the current system of mass incarceration was not predicted by anyone 30 years ago. No task is more urgent for racial justice advocates today than ensuring that America's current racial caste system is its last. When she says radical social movement, she didn't say the electoral process. She didn't say we need a new president. So she recognizes that it's going to take a grassroots movement that is real, that serves as a vehicle or mechanism of change and enforcement. So the people have to take back the country, the nation state, the Constitution, and so forth, which has always been the challenge. The idea.
General ideas.
Wait a minute. I didn't finish the last part. When you understand, and I said it earlier, you have to have the participation of the masses, okay, or you're not going to be successful. The masses are the problem, are its worst problem, and we're forced into this type of lifestyle. I mean, if I grow up in an environment where you have this landscape where there's no way out, how can I change personally? Okay?
That's my question.
And I'm answering that. You have to change the landscape. Okay? And you're not going to change it with any simple laws or promises from politicians. And like Dennis said, you're going up against the bedrock of how this country operates. Self-enrichment of a very small group of people. And you just simply are not going to change that through the electoral process. You saw where the Supreme Court says, you know what? You can give all the money you want. Ain't no restrictions. Corporations are people. Do what you got to do what you want to do. You have a freedom of speech, speak with your money. Well, who told them to say that? Who are they working for? Who's puppeteering them?
Next question, go ahead.
I look at it, and maybe 25, 30 years from now, something can be done. But now I'm just speaking to me. When I look at it right now, we have just about 50-50, 50 people are way to the right, 50% of people way to the right, 50% of the people to the left, and a few way to the left. So, to me, it's going to take time. It's going to take time. And the way I look at it, it'd be 25 or 30 years before, you were speaking of the people can, we can do things now, but to me, it'll be 25, 30 years before results and everything happen.
But things have gotten worse, not better.
I was just saying, because didn't you say that Jim Crow laws initiated in 1943?
Well,
And we're talking 57.
1876
Yeah.
to 1969. That was the original Jim Crow.
Yeah,
We're talking over 100 years.
well, yeah, and it so happened I was born in Mississippi, so until 64 and 65, we were considered non-people, because we couldn't vote and anything like that. I was just telling, I think I was telling him this evening, I was telling somebody why my people went and stood in line all day long, from just about 7 o'clock in the morning until after 5 in the evening, and the line never moved, when time to vote. So, and that was 1960, early 60s, 61, like 62 and 63, 64. So I'm just saying that now we see so many people so far to the right and the other ones to the left.
But to your point, Ahmad, 50% of people aren't to the right if you ask the question the right way. If you ask people if they believe in Social Security, majority of Americans say, hell yeah. Not yeah, hell yeah. If you ask the majority of Americans, do they believe in Medicaid and Medicare? Oh, absolutely. Good public schools, absolutely. The right to a fair trial, absolutely. You can go on down the list. Most Americans at a visceral level are progressive. They believe in unions. They believe in the right to marry who you choose, even gay marriage. But when you ask them what they watch, 45% of them watch Fox News. If you ask them who they vote for, 45% of them going to say Republicans, and they identify with the right. But that's because they're dumbasses. They don't know what they really believe because they haven't thought about it. But when you ask them again on an individual issue level, 75-80% of Americans are progressive liberals, even though they don't identify that way. So the reason why I point that out to you is 25 to 30 years from now, we're going to have a foot in our ass deeper than we have it now.
Yes.
It's going to take a revolution, which is what she said with her social, radical social, it's going to take a revolution. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I don't know what type. I'm not saying what form, but we're going to have to throw off the oligarchs one way or another and start all over again. We're not going to evolve out of this.
The other impediment is people don't even know this or acknowledge this. I mean, I'm very grateful for Malcolm X Foundation and Paper Tiger because I'm learning all of this, and I am not the enemy because I am a white person that's still an educator, and I go out and talk to a hell of a lot of other white people, whether they want to listen or not.
Yeah.
But even she says this is in the age of colorblindness. Most people think our problems are solved.
Because
we
they're
all
told
get
that.
along.
They're told
we
that.
all get along. We can work together. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
We can intermarry. We can go to school with one another.
We can live in
There's
West.
not a
But
problem.
I agree with the statement when we got to the electoral process, especially in light of, the Supreme Court knocking down the Montana law, which says, with respect to corporations giving as much money as they want to campaign contributions. So it's going to be unlimited, basically. You're not going to have people of reasonable means running for office because they're all the people they want are going to be there with corporations. But my question goes to, because it's not going to be the electoral process, because there's going to be this social movement, when we talk about generalities, because I think it means that we have to really dig deep inside and say, it is up to the individual. It is up to the individual to begin to use cash, not to give the banks interest, to pay for their houses or their rent, for the education. You talk about the 3rd and 4th graders losing them, to have a community school, to have the tutors, not relying on a system or something. It really is going to be that revolution of the individual, and how do you spread that kind of message, because it is going to be a radical social message, that you have to spread, because you can't leave it up to the system.
But have you ever seen a soft revolution like that anywhere in history? A soft revolution where through individual initiative and individual action, without any type of organizing principles, where you've seen a change happen. I can't think of a single example anywhere in history.
There is an organization. It's organizing the individuals, not through the electoral process, but community-based. Each individual, like the Paper Tigers Club, book club or whatever, sharing that information, educating other individuals. This is what you can do on a personal level. Rather than saying, we have to wait for change, there is something we can do. I mean, it might be very small, but not buying into the system, recognizing, that it is institutionalized.
You cannot.
People that say the prisoners, they have free college education, you know, they get the best benefits, they get this. I said, you know what, if you think it's such a good system, go into it.
Thank
It is
you.
available for you. It is available for you.
But see, they've been propagandized. They've been watching
Exactly.
Fox and they've been listening to Rush, and they think that they got cable TV and they
Right.
lift weights and everything's groovy.
Yeah,
They don't know reality.
Yeah.
But to affect reality, you have to be realistic.
And what are you gonna give up to do it?
Well,
Yeah.
in my mind, they're not building these prison camps all over the country for no reason. I mean, we've talked about that a million times, Doug. That's a reality.
What did you say? I didn't.
Halliburton
Oh,
and other tied-in oligarchs are building prison camps all over the country to hold thousands of people. They've got multi-billion-dollar contracts out there right now, building and stocking and manning these camps. They're not building them just because they need to exercise. So the idea that this is going to be painless or gradual, I think, is folly. It's going to take a great sacrifice unless we just acquiesce and say, okay, I've got ESPN and I can watch a Super Bowl and I got my wife and my children and I go on vacation, and everybody else who can't do that, well, that's just too bad for you. That could happen too.
Yeah.
So if that's the case 25 or 30 years from now, like I said, the foot in our ass is going to be even deep. But either we're going to have that or we're going to have some type of revolution.
Yeah, and the founding fathers, who I'm not associated with, one of them, Benjamin Franklin said, and I'm not, Benjamin Franklin said, if we don't hang together, or he says, if we don't hang together, we will all hang separately.
Yep.
Okay, but anyway, they understood that they had to make compromises and come together as a group, or it was over. I studied Zionism. Zionism is one of the better transparent infrastructure of nation building. I'm not talking about its goals. I'm talking about the way they put themselves together. And if you examine Zionism, it took 2,000 years to crystallize. It took 2,000 years for Jews to figure out that they had to come up with a nation-building concept. Okay, we ain't got 2,000 years. But people have to understand that they have to study the framework of nationalism, okay? And everybody has a conception of what nationalism is. But nationalism is a science where you build a nation, a community within a larger community. And that's coming together. The idea that you can individually make all these changes and you're gonna survive, it ain't gonna happen. The idea that you're gonna have some cash and you can do this and do that, it ain't gonna happen. It doesn't happen.
One of the encouraging things, even on the topic of nationalism, is that for the better part of the last 40 years, the banks and the international banking cartel and the corporations that they operate, that they finance, that many of it's cross-pollinated so deeply now that they're really one and the same. Corporate, these multinational corporations and the banks themselves, they have been conducting a war on the nation state.
Yes.
Financially,
Exactly.
and in certain cases like Iraq and Panama and places like that, militarily from time to time. But what I'm happy to see, and let me know if folks don't see it the same way as me, is that I see this rebirth of nationalism. You see, especially over the last 10 to 15 years in South America, where South America finally is throwing off, or at least attempting to throw off the shackles of the Monroe Doctrine and telling the United States to kiss its ass. And they got leaders down there that aren't buying into what the United States and the corporations are selling anymore.
Heroes.
Yeah.
Absolute heroes.
And now you're seeing this over the last year and a half in Europe as the squeeze is put on places like Greece, places like Spain, and Iceland in particular, where they're saying, to hell with you. We're going to do it our own way. And they're breaking away from this Euro system, which really...
That was a big...
When you really break it down, it was an attempt by these multinational corporations and the international banks to put everybody under one monetary system so that they can better control through debt, what these countries do and what they don't do. And they preach that nationalism, these banks and the corporations, preached that, you know, we're living in a global economy. Thomas Friedman, New York Times bootlicker, writes that book, The World is Flat. It's a bunch of horse manure. People aren't buying into it anymore, and they're starting to fight back. So to me, I see it. It's going to get worse before it gets better, but I look at it kind of the way it is now. So it's maybe the late 20s, 1920s, when first the banks started to put the clamps on Europe, and countries and their economies started to collapse. And obviously, we know what happened after that with the World War and things. But movements all over the world, especially here in the United States, there aren't enough white people hungry yet.
Well,
And it's going to have to get to that point, I think, before it happens. But people are starting to wake up.
And we've got leadership from other parts of the world that you don't expect. There's a group of countries that go by BRIC. It's Brazil, it's Russia, India, and China. And they're leading a brand new economic paradigm which says, screw the West. We're not going along with your schemes and your Wall Street dreams and your exploitation and the debt. We're not doing it your way. And because of that, you have Hugo Chavez in Venezuela and leaders all over South America. To your point, South America is totally reversed. And you're seeing people in Greek, they're looking for a new way. And I think that, to your point, could be part of this revolution where we get to a system that's fair and doesn't exploit people, at least to the extent that the West does now.
The objective of my question, not that I don't know, personally I have my own opinion as what to do is, for those that are watching this, you know, that they haven't read the book or whatever, and you hear this panel discussion, and you hear all the things that, you know, you brought to light about Jim Crow and how it's continuing and so forth, is if they were to ask themselves, okay, yes, that's all happening, what can I do? You know, and that's what I was trying to...
Well, that's
We-
important.
Pick up books and educate
Yeah,
yourself.
the first thing you do, you step out of the box. You study the Mormons. You study the Amish. You study Zionism. You study Hezbollah. Okay.
People won't
You
study.
study, when I talk about national, I talk about subnational communities. Okay, the idea that, you know, when you talk about Latin American nationalism, breaking off from the West and so forth, the conversation's there, but the reality is not. They're still governed by transnational corporations. Even Brazil, even Chile, even Bolivia, even Venezuela. Okay, the conversation's changed. There's been some, I would say, very limited changes, but the reality is, man, they're tied into that capitalistic mentality.
Yeah.
Okay, and until people take it upon themselves to demand justice, to demand fairness, to demand constitutional rights, it ain't gonna happen. Okay, and like I said, as long as we got nice things, we can go to the bars, and we go to the restaurants, and we got a car to drive, and all this other stuff. We ain't sacrificing. We ain't gonna sacrifice, and we have not created that grassroots infrastructure to fight back.
Yeah, I think, you know, in this country, particularly people really over the last 4 years, the disappointment of the current president, I think people are starting to realize that, you know, the two major parties are on the same team, and you know, we're all, you know, the American people have been put on waivers. I mean, they're working with each other, and it's a giant mirage. It's, to my opinion, it's been that way for a long time. You can't even get nominated for president unless you, you know, strap on the knee pads and part your ass at the globalist gangbang. It's just not going to happen. You don't even get to go to the party unless you're willing to do that.
Yep.
And I think people are finally, especially the young people who put Obama into office, they didn't take them too long to realize that, you know, they're getting taken to the cleaners on this, and they were duped. And it's going to be interesting to see the people that are, you know, 20, 30 years younger than some of us sitting here, how they're going to react to this. Now, they could react in a very violent and unproductive way and be sucked into some sort of, you know, totalitarian response, a reactionary response, especially if the economy goes south. But again, I think also it's possible that if enough people get pissed off, they decide to run for office, even on a local level. If you get enough people to run for office, and you get enough people who normally sit on their ass and don't vote, get out there and vote. What would happen to Ingham County or to Lansing, the city council, if you had 3 or 4 people from Occupy Lansing or the Green Party or Libertarians or something that got into office, and they weren't Republicans and Democrats, and they started to say no to the corporate welfare that goes on in this community way too often. And if you got people on the school board who'd actually put books like the new Jim Crow into a high school curriculum and teach an entire class on something like that. What would happen if those kind of things started to take place?
You take Egypt. When I was in California and that was taking place, the so-called revolution in Egypt, this girl said, "What do you think about that revolution?" I said, "No revolution. That's a rebellion." And they got his butt out of office. They got the same system. The system's got to change. Okay, not the personnel. We have a system that is devastating, self-destructive. If you replace these individuals who don't know a different system, we have that disease. If you don't, unless you understand that it's a system that is decayed and diseased, and you got to change the system, then why even waste your time? And the idea that the trouble I had with Occupy Wall Street, where they say things like the 1% and the 99%, and telling police officers you're part of the 99%. They're mercenaries, baby. They're the KKK in uniforms. No disrespect, because my nephew's an officer too. Okay.
Right. Well, they're duped as well.
Okay. And when you say we want the corporations to pay taxes, that's absolutely impossible. Okay. And when you say corporate greed, when in fact it's corporate genocide against the planet. They're destroying everything in their path.
Right.
That's genocide. That's not greed. They're even destroying themselves ultimately. When we don't understand that we're made up, as humans, we're made up of duality. We have good and bad, dark and light. And sometimes this dark side can take over the bright side, the strong side, the good side. And we have a system called capitalism that emphasizes that dark side. I'm going to get mine. The hell with everybody else. The more you fail, the more I succeed. It's all about me. Okay, that's not individualism. That's selfishness that we call individualism. Okay, pick ourselves up by the bootstraps and so forth and so forth. I have trouble with that. Like I was telling my friend here, I said, you know what? When they make racial discrimination, segregation, prejudice a high priority, I will get involved. But when you say, I just want a job.
Right.
I just want them to pay taxes and not realize how devastating these organizations are, because they have moved, the people that generate, control transnational corporations don't need nation states. They manipulate nation states. Yeah, they have a different social, political, economic, military order. They live in a different world. They manipulate everything. They go by no flags. We think they do. When they want wars, they start playing the patriotism and the flag and stuff like that.
But to Doug's point, in order to get back to nation states, you have to take the power back from the oligarchs who don't respect borders. That's his point. And also the fact that these young people are talking about give me a job and make the corporations pay taxes. It may be a distinction, but it's a distinction without a difference, because when it comes right down to it, it's their plea for help. They're starting to experience the same type of pain and the same type of exploitation that we've been experiencing. It's just in a different form. So that's the type of organization and banding together that we're going to need to have in order to throw this over. Because
that may be where it starts. It has in a lot of countries with the young people with no jobs.
I think quietly something's starting to happen on the campuses, because in the inner city, where you're talking Camden, New Jersey, or New York, or Harlem, or Detroit, or even smaller communities like Harlem, there's nothing left to suck dry out of those people, man. They've taken everything they could take since the end of World War II. Those communities are hellholes. This reminds me of a story. I got a friend who runs HUD properties all over the state of Michigan. I met with him last week. We got talking about, as we always do, about, he gives me stories about what goes on in his daily work. There's a particular property in Detroit, in the city, where he's having problems, and he had a security force there, private security, and they were unarmed, the initial group that he had hired. Because he runs properties, and the company that he works for in this particular property was owned by Fannie and Freddie. Fannie and Freddie pays the company that he works for to manage the property, and then through that he hires security and all the infrastructure, the maintenance and all that stuff. Well, the first security company had for this property had unarmed security guards. And one night, one of the security guards sees 3 guys breaking into the office of the facility there, the apartment complex. So he goes to investigate, and the 3 guys see him and say, "Look, man, you need to leave." So he assesses the situation as 1 on 3, decides to to leave, and calls the police. Calls the police. Police don't show up for 90 minutes. Well, by that time, they ransacked the place, stole all the computers and everything, and they're gone. They're never going to find them. So my friend gets a different security group in there. This time they're armed. Hires a different company. These guys are armed with high-powered or high-capacity pistols. Like probably assuming Glocks or something. Well, about 2 weeks after he hires this new company, he's got 2 security guards patrolling this place, one on one end, one on the other. They have their own car, too, which, of course, the taxpayers are paying for because that's Fannie and Freddie's property. Well, one of the security guards is approached by 3 guys with AK-47s. They don't shoot him, but they smack him around, send him a message that they don't appreciate him being around there messing with their business, and they steal the guy's car. The security car with the emblem on it, the siren and all that jazz. It's gone. So my friend calls, he's in a conversation with the management company of this new security group he just hired, and they're apologizing, and they had machine guns and blah, blah. He's like, well, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to hire the National Guard to come here and guard this place? What? But he said this, he tells me stories like this all the time. And I looked at him at this point, which was shaking my head for about 5 minutes when he's telling the story. I said, how much easier would your life be if drugs were decriminalized and the business that these guys are undertaking with the AK-47s, they didn't have a business anymore. The product was taken off the market. He said, it'd make it a lot easier. But he has stories like this every time. He could talk for hours. Detroit, not the entire city, but vast swaths of Detroit. You get off the highway. I got off last week. I was down at the Ruther Library researching my book. I get off on West Grand Boulevard off of 94. I get off on an on-ramp there. I'm the only car there for the most part. It's like 9 o'clock in the morning. I get off and I'm at the stoplight. I'm looking around. It looks like goddamn Libya after the North Atlantic terrorist organization bombed the hell out of it for 5 months. That's what this place looks like. It's Detroit. I go 2 miles down the road, and I see the Motown Museum, and I see Henry Ford Hospital, and I see the Fisher Building where WJR is located, and all of a sudden the whole landscape changes, and it gets nice all of a sudden. But for the last 5 miles I've been driving, it's an absolute hellhole. There are people sleeping in the street, lined up at shelters, waiting to get fed breakfast in the morning because they don't have a job, they don't have any money to go to the store. If you could find a damn store in the town that doesn't sell a convenience store, there's no supermarkets.
I do business in Detroit a lot. They have whole neighborhoods. In fact, the city of Detroit, as we speak, has not one store where you can go in and buy fresh vegetables and fruit. Not one. You have whole neighborhoods where you don't have police patrols, you don't have firefighters. You call, if you get a response within 2 or 3 hours, you're lucky. So that's the point now. Why does that happen? Why do you go to Greektown and there's a police presence everywhere you go? Why do you go to the casinos? Why do you go over to the Fisher Building where you were, Henry Ford Hospital, down by the DMC? Police presence. They take care of the things that they want to take care of. And then they leave the rest of it to their own devices. I've heard a similar story, man. A guy bought a new car, came out next morning, car stolen. So he sets up motion detectors and arms himself. The next car he gets, first night, guys come to take his car. He jumps out there with a gun, and they're standing there saying, "Hey, man, are you crazy? You want to die for a car? You better put that gun down, go back in there and watch TV, and shut up." The streets are run by the people who are left to their own devices, the Jim Crow victims. They don't have an economic alternative. Right. They're not going to go to GM and get a job. They're not going to go to Ford and get a good job. They're not going to go down to U&D or Wayne State and get an education. Cooley High, you name it, many of those heights are gone. There's nothing left. There's nothing left. So that's all part of this book.
Yeah, and that's the master plan.
Absolutely.
They say, well, we went to Iraq, we made a lot of mistakes, everything went wrong. No, it didn't.
No, it was exactly the way
It
they
happened
It went
exactly
the
what
way
they
they
wanted to
planned
do.
it.
They sent their asses back
And you thought
to the Stone
Mississippi was
Age,
bad.
which is exactly what they wanted to do. And they're going to do the same. They're going to try to do the same thing
It's not-
in Afghanistan. They did the same thing in Libya and all that. And this idea that they're so concerned about the people getting killed in Syria and all that,
At least it was
that's crap too.
warfare in the street.
That's crap too, man.
Now, you have the CIA, and they admit it now, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. At least they tried to cover it up a little bit in Iraq and in Libya. Now they're just come out in the news and say, yeah, the CIA is funding the rebels in Syria.
Yeah.
Well, they've been funding them for years, and so the rebels are Al-Qaeda, Al-CIA. They don't even try to hide it anymore in the news. Al-Qaeda is the globalist goon squad. The CIA was founded by Wall Street. This is all open history.
Yeah, it is.
The Dulles brothers were Wall Street lawyers before John Foster became Secretary of State, and who the hell's the other guy?
Bissell.
Alan Dulles became the head of the CIA.
And Richard Bissell.
Yeah, and these guys came from Wall Street.
But remember some of the earlier conversations we've had? Who air conditioned Kennedy's head?
Right.
The CIA. Who killed Martin Luther King? Who killed Robert Kennedy? Who pulled off the false flag attack on September 11th, 2001? It's all related. These are the same people. And they're not going to go down because we decide that
Oh, we busted. We know what you're doing.
Yeah, right.
it's not going to be that easy.
Yeah.
No. But the main thing is that you got to break the conditioning, and
People need to suffer.
now, yeah.
People need to go hungry, need to lose their kids, need to lose their arms, need to get beat upside the head, blah blah this and blah blah that. I talked about that. I talked about that fear I had, and I was talking to my wife, and I said, and I wanted to get to that. I said, I can see why somebody becomes a suicide bomber. I'm not interested in that. I got to lose, a lot to lose. Okay, I'm the cat you're trying to change. All right, unless things really get bad. But anyway, check this out. Suicide bomber. Suicide bomber has no place to turn. There's no international law. There's no national law. There's no vehicle that he can go to and say, you know what? I'm being done wrong. I need justice. I need an opportunity to correct the situation. Says to himself, you know what? I'm going to go cash in my chips. They're going to take care of my family. They're going to give my family a house. They're going to send my kids to school. Where do I sign?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, where do I sign? Everything's been taken away. Okay, and another thing I said, and Malcolm X said this in his book at the back when it first came out. It says, when the black man is ready to die, he will be free. And Jews said the same thing. When the Jew is not afraid to die, he will be free and he will be powerful. Okay, so when you're prepared to throw it all in the wind, and that doesn't mean get violent.
Right.
Okay, that means take over your soul. That means be autonomous. That means suffer the consequences of seeking the truth and self-empowerment. Okay, something good might happen. It's a 50-50 chance. Okay, so when you get to that point and you read this book and you're afraid, and you see at any moment your life could be turned upside down, you could be destroyed. Okay, and I have it every day I walk on ice. And I see police cars, and I get stopped a lot, man. And a lot of times I don't get tickets. I get stopped all over this country. I know what's color must get in my hair, and there's all this stuff, and they let me slide. They stop me for ridiculous reasons, okay? And sometimes they're apologetic, but it's scary because I know what power they have. And it's not that I'm afraid in the sense that I'm chicken shit. Mm-hmm. I know what they can do to me and my family. And this thing about gangsters in Mexico, if they can't get to you, they get their family. Governments do that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Other gangsters all over the world do that. Mm-hmm. You have to consider all that, and that's why when you say, "F it, man," I'm going on in a split second of glory. I'm gonna get what I can.
I, being in the afternoon of my life, don't see that I have this much longer to live, but I enjoy being able to read and study. My thing is to give books away to people that want to read, things that excite them, and especially the young people. But when I look and consider what I've seen and what I feel is that weaponry around us is much too great. The microwave technology is too much. In a sense, Iceland is sitting on a keg that could blow us all away. We change our whole earth again, and then the recycling will begin. Because 15,000 years ago, we weren't here. The dust of the people that were here before us is still here. It's just recycling. We're all in one. In this world, we'll recycle when things get too bad. If you remember when Ayatollah blew off the steam when the airplanes couldn't leave England, they had to go around. In the 1600s, there were millions of people killed by the same area volcanic. And right now, with our microwave technology, we're shaking things up, we're trying to control weather. This volcano is enough to make the sun not shine for a few days. And that way the vegetation goes and then the food grows. There'll be a few, but I'm thinking this will happen. And the weaponry we have with microwave technology is scary.
Yeah, when the British Empire was in India, and I saw this in the movie on Mahatma Gandhi, and I think I let you alone, you probably remember this scene. Mahatma Gandhi goes from South Africa, goes to school, becomes a lawyer, goes to India and becomes this leader of this incredibly powerful social movement, grassroots social movement, and embraces nonviolence, okay? Not sacrifice, nonviolence. So he's sitting down at the round table with all this military people from England and the people who were the leaders of the colony in India. And you got military people, you got corporate people, you got all kinds of leaders that are very, very powerful. And Mahatma telling them, you better leave. We don't want you here. India belongs to Indians. You're not Indian. Leave. And one of the journalists said, so you think we're just going to get up and leave? He said, yes. And he laughed. So Mahatma Gandhi went to the people and he says, take back your soul. Take back yourselves. You don't have to lift a gun. Take back your soul. Take back your name. Take back your clothes. Take back your salt. Take back your families. Don't participate in his war. Don't participate in his nonsense. Okay? And sometimes you get killed for that. And that's what I'm talking about, the suicide aspect. That's the suicide that I'm talking about. I'm not going to participate anymore. If we stop going to those ridiculous wars, the hell with their technology. They need people on the ground. Okay? When they went to Haiti to attack Haiti, they sent black people, a lot of them. When they go to Latin America, they send a lot of brown people who speak Spanish. Okay? If you don't have a military, I'm going to give you an example here. Rights, the rights of Indian tribes, Indians and tribes. Okay, this is the ACLU Guide to Indian and Tribal Rights. And it talks about all the rights. Talks about the laws and so forth. And then it says here, it says, what is the source of federal power over Indians? The ultimate source of the federal government's power over Indians is its military strength. Ultimately, that's what it is. So if you don't contribute to that military strength, that's why I said, don't tell me the police officers are 99%. They're mercenaries, baby. They get paid to keep us in check and ruin our lives. I don't want to identify with them.
Well,
They're
you
not
know,
good guys.
Norm Finkelstein, one of your favorite people, he's the guy who talked about the real objective of Zionism. We talked about him before. Well, he's got a new book out, and it's about part of it's about Gandhi, and he talks about Gandhi's the misreading of Gandhi in that he was nonviolent, and they think people thought that he was this milquetoast guy who would just sit around and said, just as long as we don't raise our hand and we show them the moral compass that we go by, they'll see the errors of the ways. But what Gandhi also talked about was courage. He didn't truck no punks. He could not stand people who wouldn't stand up for themselves. He talked about courage quite a bit. Now, I hear you on this micro-technology. I'm a firm believer in HAARP. Have you heard about this? It's a technology that can start earthquakes and change weather. And I think what happened in Haiti is a result of that. And to your point, I do think we're right on the precipice of a cataclysmic. There's all kind of risks out here. The volcanoes, the earth crust displacement that could take place in 2012. That was a theory by Charles Hapgood that was endorsed by Einstein. That a lot of people think that the Mayan calendar is coincidentally showing to be true. I mean, there's a lot of natural catastrophes that could occur. But God damn it, I don't want to wait because I want a pound of flesh. I want a little payback. I want the people who did this to my ancestors and my children's children to pay a little price for doing it. So for me, I think we've got to raise the flag and do for ourselves when it comes to something like this. That's where I am.
In order to do that, we have to all raise our levels of consciousness.
Oh, no doubt.
And that's some serious meditation around the world.
But all it takes is one. It takes a critical mass. It doesn't take
Good
a
point.
mass movement. It takes
Now, it doesn't take
leadership
everybody,
and a
just
critical
enough.
mass, and you can get people there because they feel it at a visceral level. People feel it.
Well, I work at that, and I know a lot of people that do.
Okay.
It's a power for everything.
It's time to maybe wrap
Well,
up.
can I say something in closing? You see here, this Indian, so-called Indian, Cheyenne Indian warrior, and his face is blackened. It's blackened with ashes. Okay. In their tradition, a lot of Indians' tradition, if you were offended or a member of your family was offended, it was your personal responsibility, the responsibility of your family to avenge that wrong. And here, he had fires of hatred and anger and vengeance. And once he took care of business, he went to the fire, let it burn out, put the ashes on his face, and then he walks through the village and he lets people know that the wrongdoing against him and his family are now taken care of. The fire had burned out. The first law on the western side of the world, according to Europeans, was called lex talionis. That was in stone, coded. The very first law, lex talionis. Lex is Latin for law. Talionis, what word can you get out of there? Retaliate. The law of revenge. It was mandatory that you and your family retaliate when a wrong was done to you, and it was supported by, in this case, it was how do you pronounce it? Byzantine government about 5,000 years ago. Byzantine Empire, whatever it was. That was the very first law written. That was pretty universal all over.
Sure, the Old
Okay,
Testament.
lex talionis, the law of revenge. So that went for probably 1,000, 2,000 years, but then people started just taking out a lot of people because they had the law behind them. So government started saying, wait, we can't do that. We have to put that in the hands of government. Government will avenge your losses, your offenses against your family and so forth. Bring it to the government, okay, and we will give you justice. So what happened was, over a period of time, justice was getting kind of eerie and hairy where people didn't always get justice. So people started returning to lex talionis. And this is what people are talking about. And she talks about if the vehicle of enforcement for justice is not available to us, we have to create a vehicle. And again, it doesn't mean armed struggle. When Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, and Mahatma Gandhi said, you go fight your own wars on your own, baby. That's yours. Okay? That's your issue. I'm not killing people because you say it's going to benefit me, and if I don't kill them, I'm not patriotic. All right? So we have to create a vehicle of enforcement in seeking justice because the vehicle today is not honest and it's not just. So we have to think about how do we create a grassroots vehicle where we can pursue justice. That's why we have to examine our humanity, because we can say we're going to do it, but we have to start doing it right now in our own personal lives, like Thomasine was saying, you know, and in our relationships with each other. That's revolutionary.
And ultimately, that's what we all want, right? Justice.
I think so.
Oh, yeah.
We want
I think
justice.
so, yes.
We're not looking to exploit people. We're not looking to control all the economic benefits in the world. We're not trying to tell people how to live their lives. We just want to live in peace and have justice.
We
That's
want
all.
to enjoy our lives and our families, our relationships.
Does anybody else have anything you want to close with?
No, this is good.